Hello, John Bloodworth, Gentleman Crafter, back with some more adventures in machine embroidery. This time around I didn't have a huge amount of design time, so I basically picked up this awesome design called I've Lived a Thousand Lives from a website called Urban Threads. So to get that into Hatch, I basically just open it as a new file. It is designed elsewhere, so it will import as a lower grade, meaning I can't do a lot of resizing, but that wasn't necessarily my goal, so that's a relief. Basically the first thing that I did was change the colours, just so that I could get an idea of what I was going to do with this. Now I had a few initial ideas, but the first thing to do was lock that in place so I didn't mess it up. My idea really is to fill in or colour in the design. So basically I'm just using the simple digitizing tools, applying fills, selecting colours, and then digitizing each section bit by bit. So I'm starting with the banner, and I'm going to be right and left clicking as we've done before, and this obviously gives me a choice of straight or curved points. So as you can see, at the point of the banner I would use a left click, and then obviously on the curves I would use the right clicks as indicated by the yellow rings. And then to set that in place I press enter twice, and that then places it and fills it with the tatami stitch that I've selected. I'm then changing the angle a little bit so that it looks more like it's flowing in the right direction. And then I go back and reselect my digitizing tool, change the color, keep everything else the same, and then I would digitize this in pretty much exactly the same way. Now I'm not going to make you watch me do the entire thing, as that would be quite boring for you, but it is pretty much the same. I'm just alternating between the white and the grey colour. Excuse me. Now, as I say, I'm not going to make you watch the whole thing, so I am just going to flip the screen and flip forward in time to where I've digitized that banner. And there you can see. Just a couple of changes again on the angle of the stitch. Another goal for this really was to avoid all of the pull going in one direction. So if you stitch all in one direction, you end up with a lot of pull, so that might distort the whole design a bit. I was trying out different fills as well, just to see if anything else would really sort of fit the bill, as it were. And that's just a case of clicking through the stitch types that are available. I thought contour might make a good one, but in the end I decided to go back to the solid fill of the tatami. A bit more fiddling with angles. Thinking about it now, I probably would have applied maybe a Florentine effect, so that it actually has a little bit of curve going around that corner on that particular piece. But nonetheless I moved ahead. I selected all the grey parts in the sequence tab and then moved those so they sat at the top, which basically means they're going to get stitched first, and then the white parts would get stitched second. I moved these above the stitch lines, so the dark stitch lines, so that'll be stitched last. I then made a couple of changes to the spacing, just to reduce the stitch count and really to reduce the density of the design. Again, just fiddling with the angles of those grey parts. I am a naughty fiddler. I do tend to fiddle a lot. So sorry about that. I will skip ahead in just a second again. Okay, so after a bit more fiddling, I locked everything else in place and went for the freehand closed shape. The idea here was I was going to do an entire fill around the design, but what I decided to do was kind of a wavy background. And obviously a solid fill would have been too much. So I changed the spacing, removed the underlay, removed the travel on edge, and I felt that all those jump stitches underneath would make it a bit unsightly, so I did try to eradicate them by moving the start and stop points, but no matter what I did, it didn't really work for me. Despite however many times I tried. Literally going around the whole entire perimeter. So in the end I decided to try the ripple stitch, and that was very amazing, very impressive. It had sort of almost like a loose fabric feel to it. So I went with it, then I duplicated it and made a slightly larger version. Mirrored it in the opposite direction as well, just to give a bit of variety. Now I did a couple of colour changes there which I didn't want, so I undid those. And then changed the colourways on the, let's call it a splat. Changed the colourways on the splat just to get an idea of how they would work compared to the design. Increased the spacing again to reduce the density, and these were only intended to be a little bit of background fun, so I didn't necessarily want them to be too stitch heavy. I then hid all of the other bits, and I intended to create like a solid fill for the background, including the book. So I started out with the freehand closed shape, but soon realized that that was actually a rubbish idea. So I skipped back and then digitized it using the digitized closed shape. But I then suddenly realized actually that's rubbish because it goes behind the white banners, the white banner. So I then went back and started again. This time around I just did it where the book was, or the books, the pile of books. And again, this is just literally tracing the outline using the right and left clicks. And I don't know whether you know, but there is an option if ever you sort of get to a point where you think the previous part is rubbish, you can just use your backspace key to retrace your steps, removing the nodes that you've created one by one. So it's a good way of, it's basically an undo button, like I just did there, for your stitch placement. Very handy to have, as I needed it again there. Get carried away sometimes. So the idea here really is again just to get some kind of sketched colour fill going on for that pile of books. So I'm not necessarily paying any attention to the difference between the pages and the books. It's just a case of tracing out that sort of solid shape, as it were. Again, pressing enter to confirm that and select the shape, moving it to the back of the stack. There you go, a bit of a rhyme for you. And then just adjusting any little bits that stuck out that I didn't quite get right earlier on. Now again, as I mentioned, it's supposed to be a sort of loose colour fill. So I tried out a couple of different stitch types just to see what would work. And although it's not accurate and it's not precise, I actually quite liked how this contour had all the different variations in it. So I went with that, and then I traced the other bit of the page. And again applied that contour fill. Brought back the background bits and pieces. I'm liking how it's looking so far. What do you think? Would you have done something similar? Would you have done the colouring? What stitch types would you have gone for? Are you a satin stitch kind of person or an embossed fill? I'm curious. Do let me know. Again, I've fallen into the fiddling trap, just resizing a few bits and pieces here and there. And rotating them. It's just really whatever feels right, whether it's the size, the proportions, the rotations, the colours, just whatever feels right, whatever works for you. That's the beauty of being able to plan out all of these things before you actually start stitching. For a fiddler like me, it's a joy box of a toolbox. Okay, just running it through the stitch player quickly just to check things and see how things are going to stitch out and work. As it was stitching out, I got into my head that I would actually prefer some slightly different colouring or some different colouring for the top collection of pages. Not too worried about the pages in the other books, but just to really highlight that design difference or design feature, I thought it might be fun to do that. So it looks like everything's got a good sequence when it comes to the stitching. It's all going in the right place. There's no hugely dense areas that are going to cause me problems by the look of it. And then, as I said, I did make a couple of changes, so I'm just rerunning that through the stitch player just to double check. I did add the coloured pages, and I did a range of different colour changes as well. So you'll see the finished design in just a second. I basically went for an antique brown feel. And there we go. There's the finished design all stitched out. I really enjoyed this, even though I had a little amount of time. But using existing designs in this way is a great way of getting your stitch fix in at the same time as keeping up with your practice on the different tools. Okay, that's it for this one. Please do remember to give it a thumbs up, and thank you for watching.